Greetings, traveler. I'm glad to see you in my tavern. Here you may rest after a hard road, drink a mug of good ale, and listen to an old, honest witcher's tale, one that smells of smoke, winding roads, and silver coins. The night smelled of rain and resin. Pines dripped with the memory of a passing storm, their dark needles whispering under the wind. Along the muddy trail that wound like a vein through the outskirts of Broccolon Forest, a lone horse moved at a steady, patient pace. Its rider sat tall in the saddle, the hood of his cloak drawn low, the glint of twin swords faint beneath the folds. Geralt of Rivia had ridden through Broccolon's borders more times than most men dared to speak of. Yet tonight, even he felt the weight of the forest pressing close. It was not fear. It was the sense of being watched by something older than men, older than his kind. The dryads kept their distance, but he knew they were there. Always were. He was heading toward the small river town of Belhaven to collect payment from his last contract, a werewolf that had grown bold and begun to hunt shepherds near the hills. The job was done cleanly, but the path had led him deeper into Broccolon than he'd intended, and so he rode without rest, his thoughts half on his next meal, half on the weather. Then, from the gloom, came the sound of hooves. Geralt slowed Roach with a touch of the reins, hand dropping to the hilt at his back. The other rider emerged from the fog, a young man on a bay mare wearing a blue surcoat embroidered with a lion's head, the emblem of Karak, a royal messenger. His horse was lathered with sweat, his cloak torn by branches. "Witcher," the rider called out, relief plain in his voice. "Thank Melitele, you're real." Geralt arched a brow. "Real enough you've been chasing ghosts?" "Of a sort," the man panted, swinging down from the saddle. "I've ridden 3 days from Saltview. The town's under curse, or worse. They said only a witcher could stand against it." "Saltview?" Geralt repeated. "Fishing port north coast?" The messenger nodded. "Yes, Master Witcher. Storms uncovered old crypts beneath the cliffs. Since then, graves open themselves, corpses walk, and voices whisper from the mists, calling the living by name." Geralt's eyes narrowed. "Calling by name?" The messenger shuddered. "Aye. Some folk say the dead are looking for their kin. Others swear they hear voices of the still living, voices like their own. A fisherman swore he heard himself calling from the sea." Geralt dismounted. "How many dead?" "Too many. The mayor has posted a bounty, 200 orens for the one who ends the haunting." "That's all?" The man hesitated. 200 in the favor of Duke Anselm of Karak. Should you succeed?" Geralt gave a quiet snort. Favors from dukes were wind, sometimes warm, sometimes foul. But something in the messenger's eyes, a tremor born of true fear, told him the matter was more than common superstition. "When did it start?" Geralt asked. "The day after the storm," the messenger said. 3 nights passed. Since then, no man dares the graveyard after dusk. Those who do," he swallowed, "they vanish. All but one, an old gravedigger. They found him at dawn, clawing at the earth, muttering nonsense. Said the grave whispered the name, Geralt. For a long moment only the forest spoke. Rain hissed through the pines. "Interesting," Geralt muttered at last. He tugged his cloak tighter and looked north. "All right, I'll go." The messenger's relief was palpable. "You'll have a horse waiting at the crossroads. Tell them Sir Odon sent you. May the gods guide you, Witcher." Never counted much on gods. Geralt mounted Roach, but I'll find your ghosts. The rider bowed and spurred off into the trees, vanishing down the track. Geralt sat a moment longer, listening. The forest had fallen silent again, as if it too waited for something to happen. He turned Roach northward. By dawn, the forest thinned, giving way to rolling hills, where the sea wind carried a salt sting. On the horizon lay Salt View, a huddle of slate roofs and crooked chimneys clinging to the cliffs like barnacles. The sound of gulls pierced the air. Geralt rode into town under gray skies. The people watched from doorways, wary and hollow-eyed. He saw the signs of fear. Salt scattered across thresholds, sprigs of rowan hung from lintels, crude charms shaped from fishbone. At the tavern he found the mayor, a thick-set man with a seamed face and hands like shovels. "Witcher," he said without preamble, "you're here about the graves." Geralt nodded. "Tell me what you know." The man's eyes darted toward the window as if afraid the wind might overhear. Storm tore open part of the old burial grounds near the cliffs. Since then, the dead won't stay dead. We've buried the same folk twice, some 3 times. Worse, folk hear voices from the graves, voices calling them. Last night, a boy named Marin ran off after dark. His mother heard him crying outside, but when she opened the door, he broke off, trembling. There was nothing but footprints leading to the cemetery. Geralt leaned forward. "Show me." The mayor hesitated. "You'll go there now? It's nearly dusk. That's when they'll come out." A silence fell. The innkeeper crossed himself. Geralt rose, fastening his cloak. "Get me a lantern and shovels." The mayor swallowed. "You mean to dig?" Sometimes the truth hides underground. He left the tavern as the sky bled into twilight, a silver line of sea glimmering beyond the cliffs. The wind moaned through the town's narrow lanes, carrying the faint scent of brine and decay. As Geralt approached the graveyard, Roach balked, snorting. The Witcher's medallion gave a faint, restless tremor against his chest. Magic. Faint but old, the kind that seeps into stone and never quite dies. Graves lay in disarray, mounds of wet earth split open, coffins gnawed through from within. Among the ruins, a single voice whispered, "Geralt!" He froze. The name came again, soft as breath. Geralt of Rivia. He drew steel, its edge catching the last light of the dying sun. The grave before him stirred, and from the broken soil, a pale hand reached out. The fingers that clawed through the soil were gray, cracked like dry stone. Clumps of damp earth fell away from the hand as it groped blindly for the air, for life that was long fled. Geralt's sword came up in a smooth arc, his stance shifting, boots silent upon the grass. The grave shifted once more, and with a muffled cry the rest of the body pushed free. It was a man, or what had once been one. A fisherman by the look of the tattered vest and the salt-stained boots, still clinging to his feet. His eyes were milky, his skin stretched thin as parchment. And yet, when his head turned toward Geralt, the Witcher felt something stir in his gut. Not the usual revulsion, but recognition. The corpse's face bore a faint, impossible resemblance to his own, the same strong jaw, the same pale hair, though ragged and tangled with roots. Geralt. The thing croaked again, its lips tearing with the effort. Geralt of Rivia. For a heartbeat the air stood still, then the Witcher moved. Steel flashed in the dying light. The blade sang as it cut through rotted flesh and bone. The creature gave no cry, only a shudder, and then it crumpled to the ground, Motionless once more, Geralt crouched beside it, eyes narrowed. There were no signs of necrophage feeding, no scent of ghoul rot. The corpse's heart had been dead for days, yet some spark, some whisper had animated it. He wiped the blade clean on the torn vest and straightened, glancing toward the rows of graves that stretched into the mist. A whisper rippled through the stillness, then another. Geralt, Geralt. The voices came from every direction, soft, overlapping, rising in a dreadful chorus that rolled through the graveyard like a tide. Dozens of graves shuddered, as though something beneath them sought release. Geralt muttered a curse, sheathing steel for silver. He drew a circle in the dirt with the tip, murmuring the words of the Yrden sign. The air shimmered, crackling with violet light. The whispers faltered, fading to silence. For now, he turned and saw a flicker of movement near the chapel ruins, a lantern's glow bobbing uncertainly. He approached, hand ready, but found only an old man kneeling beside a toppled headstone. The man's beard was matted with dirt, his clothes soaked through with rain and mud. His eyes were wide and empty, pupils pale as moonstone. "You shouldn't be here," Geralt said quietly. The gravedigger looked up. "Had to listen," he rasped. "They called to me, said the sea would take us all if we didn't answer." "Who called you?" The man's cracked lips trembled. "The white-haired one. Said he was sent to open the way." Geralt's brow furrowed. "White-haired?" The gravedigger nodded, a feverish gleam in his gaze. "Aye, like you, Witcher. Just like you. But he weren't no man. I seen his eyes. They were hollow. He came from the cliffs when the storm broke, walked out of the mist with the lightning at his back, said the grave was calling your name." Geralt felt the medallion quiver again, faint but constant. "When did you see him?" 3 nights ago." "Show me." The gravedigger hesitated, glancing toward the cliffs. "You'll not like it, Witcher." "I rarely do," Geralt said. "Lead on." They followed a narrow trail that wound between the graves, through brambles and crumbling walls, until the land sloped sharply downward. The sea lay beyond, a black mirror under the swollen moon, its edges flashing silver where waves shattered against stone. At the base of the cliffs, half buried in earth and seaweed, yawned a dark cleft. "There," the old man whispered. "The storm opened it. An old crypt, they say, elven from before the kingdom's founding. He came from there, the white-haired one." Geralt approached the opening. The air that drifted out was cold and dry, tinged with the scent of dust and something older. Old magic, the kind that lingered long after its purpose was forgotten. He knelt, running a gloved hand over the carved lintel. The markings were faint but legible, elven runes of mourning, a script of the Dol Blathana dialect. "Rest, my beloved, until the moon calls you home." He straightened. "How many have entered?" "None save him," the gravedigger whispered. "And those he called." The Witcher's gaze swept over the dark entrance. The whispers had ceased, yet he could feel the presence beneath, something stirring, patient and watchful. He turned back to the old man. "Go home, lock your door, burn sage if you've got any." "What about you?" "I've work to do." The man hesitated, then hobbled away, lantern swinging like a dying star. Geralt waited until he was gone before stepping closer to the crypt. The wind rose behind him, carrying a faint echo from the graves above. He drew silver, its edge glimmering in the moonlight. Then he descended. The passage wound downward, through the rock, the walls slick with damp and marked by old symbols half swallowed by moss. As he moved, The faint blue glow of his cat's eyes lit the way. The air grew colder, heavy with the weight of centuries. Somewhere ahead, water dripped with slow, rhythmic patience. When he reached the heart of the crypt, he found it, a chamber of stone, the walls carved with elven effigies. At the center lay a sarcophagus, its lid cracked open by the storm's fury. Inside, the bones of an elf rested in the remnants of silk and silver. But it was not the elf that caught his eye. Footprints, bare, recent, leading from the coffin toward a secondary passage cut into the rock. Geralt followed them until the tunnel widened into a low cavern. There, scattered across the floor, lay remnants of ritual, candles burned to stubs, circles drawn in salt and blood, a mirror darkened by soot, and beside it, a torn scrap of parchment. He knelt and held the scrap close to the glow of his witcher's lamp. The writing was hurried but clear. Elandra's ritual must not fail. His soul is near. If the graves speak, the bond is working. Geralt frowned. The name stirred something in his memory. Elandra, a mage from the northern schools, exiled for tampering with necromantic arts. She had vanished years ago, said to be searching for a way to bridge life and death without invoking the higher powers. So that's what this was. Not a haunting, a summoning. He rose slowly, scanning the chamber once more. Then he heard it, the faint scrape of movement behind him. Steel flashed as he turned. From the shadows stepped a figure cloaked in rags, pale hair falling over a hollow face, eyes empty, gleaming silver. The voice that came from its mouth was low, deliberate. "Geralt of Rivia," it said, "you should not have come." The Witcher's grip tightened. "Seems unexpected." The figure tilted its head. "I am what was made in your image. She shaped me from memory and magic. You are the blade. I am the echo." It smiled, a grim parody of his own smirk. "Elandra calls to the dead," it said softly, "and soon she will call for you." Before Geralt could answer, the doppelganger vanished into the dark, leaving only the sound of retreating steps and the cold whisper of the sea beyond the stone. The Witcher sheathed his sword and muttered under his breath, "So it's to be ghosts and mirrors, then." He turned back toward the surface. The wind howled through the cracks above, and far away, the graves began to whisper his name once more. The storm returned with the dawn. Waves crashed against the cliffs of Saltview, flinging cold spray up into the misty air. The town awoke slowly, unwillingly, as though each house held its breath, waiting for something dreadful to pass. Geralt of Rivia stood outside the chapel ruins, his cloak drawn close, his eyes fixed on the gray sea beyond. The wind whipped at his hair, tangling white strands against his shoulders. He'd seen enough in the crypt to know this was no simple curse. Someone had meddled with death, and death was answering. He turned when the mayor approached, flanked by two fishermen armed with pikes. "You went to the graveyard last night," the man said, "and lived to tell it. What did you find?" Geralt's gaze remained distant. An elf's crypt beneath the cliffs. Something has disturbed it, someone. The dead don't rise on their own. The mayor's heavy brows drew together. "Someone? You mean a sorcerer?" "Close enough," the Witcher replied. "A woman named Elandra. Used to study at Ban Ard. She was exiled for necromancy years ago." The fishermen crossed themselves, muttering prayers. "Then the gods save us," one whispered. "No living man can fight the black arts." Geralt sheathed his hands into his gloves. "That's why I'm here." He left them then, striding toward the edge of town. He could feel eyes upon him, fearful, pleading, some suspicious. It was always the same. To them, witchers were necessary evils, not saviors. They were monsters to fight monsters. And when the work was done, the villagers prayed they'd leave before nightfall. The path down to the coast twisted through gullies of black rock, slick with moss. He followed the scent of salt and ash, moving toward the cliff base where he had found the crypt. Yet the air had changed overnight. The sea stank of something foul, as though rot had seeped into the tide itself. When he reached the beach, he found fresh footprints in the sand, bare feet, small, leading from the waterline toward the crypt entrance. Someone had come or gone before dawn. He knelt, fingers brushing the tracks. The gate was light, deliberate, not the shuffle of the dead, but a living woman's step. He rose and entered the crypt once more. Inside, the air was colder than before, thick with the scent of burned herbs and blood. Someone had lit candles again, black ones this time, their flames trembling though no wind touched them. On the sarcophagus lay a new circle, drawn in chalk and ink, symbols overlapping like tangled vines. Geralt approached, reading the markings. Old elven glyphs woven with human runes, words of passage, of calling. It was a binding spell, one meant to hold something between worlds. At its center rested a silver amulet shaped like a tear. He reached to touch it. "Don't," a voice said softly from the shadows. He turned, his hand on the hilt of steel. A woman stepped into the candlelight. She wore a cloak the color of ashes, her face pale, her hair dark and braided with silver thread. Her eyes glowed faintly with the blue of power restrained. "Elandra," Geralt said. "You remember me?" Her lips curved faintly. "You suppose I should be honored?" "I remember the trial at Banard," he replied. "You tried to raise your lover from the battlefield. The mages called it blasphemy. I called it mercy." She stepped closer and the candles flared. "And now I've found the way to finish what they forbade me to complete." Geralt's tone hardened. "By binding souls to corpses, by letting the dead whisper through the graves." "They whisper because they're trapped," she hissed. "When men die unjustly, slain in wars not their own, their spirits wander. I've only given them voices. You've given them unrest." Her eyes glimmered with tears she refused to shed. "You don't understand, Witcher. He was taken from me before his time. I can still hear him in the dark. I can bring him back. The sea carried his body to these shores for a reason." Geralt shook his head. "The sea brings all manner of corpses. It doesn't mean fate chose this one." Elandra's expression faltered, then hardened once more. "You think I'm mad. They all do. But you saw him, didn't you? The echo? The one who wears your face?" "I saw it," he said evenly. "A construct of magic and memory. Dangerous." She smiled faintly. "Not dangerous to me. He was made to protect what I build." "And to call me by name," Geralt said. "Why?" Elandra's eyes met his, unreadable. "Because you are the blade that must fall when the gate opens. The ritual needs balance, a slayer bound to a savior. Without that, the veil cannot be broken." Geralt's jaw tightened. "You're using me." "Not yet." She lifted her hand. The candles guttered, shadows lengthened. For an instant, Geralt saw shapes moving in the dark beyond her, faces half-formed, eyes hollow and pleading. Then they were gone. "Leave this place," he said quietly, "before it consumes you." Elandra's voice softened. "You've killed monsters all your life, Geralt of Rivia, but not all monsters have claws." The words hung between them, Then the wind shifted, carrying a new sound, the low hum of magic rising like a storm beneath the ground. The walls trembled, dust fell from the ceiling in fine gray rain. "She's begun the next phase," Elandra murmured, turning toward the deeper tunnels. "He's coming through." Geralt followed her gaze, the sound growing louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Who?" Her answer was barely a whisper. "My beloved." Before he could stop her, she ran into the shadows, the hem of her cloak vanishing around the corner. Geralt swore and followed. The tunnels bent sharply, descending again into the earth's bowels. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of ozone and decay. When he emerged into the next chamber, he saw it, a vast cavern open to the sea through a crack in the cliff. The tide rushed in, swirling around stones inscribed with runes that glowed sickly green. At the center stood Elandra, arms raised, her cloak whipping in the wind. The water churned violently, and from its depths rose a figure, a corpse armored in rusted steel, eyes burning faintly with blue fire. Geralt's hand went to his sword. "That's not resurrection," he said. "That's possession." Elandra's voice broke, half sob, half command. "He remembers me." The corpse turned its gaze toward her, and a groan echoed through the cavern, a sound that was neither human nor beast. It took a staggering step forward. Geralt moved. The blade sang as it met the undead's rusted weapon. Sparks flew. The force of the blow drove him back a step, but he recovered quickly, striking again, aiming for the neck. The corpse parried with impossible strength. Elandra screamed, the sound thick with magic. Runes flared around the chamber, feeding the creature's power. Geralt's medallion vibrated violently. He shifted his stance, drew a sign with his free hand, and shouted, "Ard!" The blast of force struck the corpse squarely, throwing it against the wall with a crack of armor and bone. The runes flickered. Elandra fell to her knees, clutching her chest. Geralt advanced, sword raised. "End it, sorceress, before it ends you!" But she only looked up, eyes wide with desperate devotion. "He just needs more time. Just a little more time." The corpse rose again, its face, half rotted, half shadow, turned toward Geralt, and for a heartbeat he saw his own reflection in its hollow eyes. Then it lunged. Steel met steel, the ring of it echoing through the cavern like thunder, and above them, unseen, the graveyard began to whisper his name again, louder, clearer, as though the dead themselves waited to see which Geralt would fall. The cavern thundered with each clash of steel. Sparks burst where blades met, throwing wild flashes of light across the black water. Geralt's boots slid upon the slick stone, but his balance never faltered. He turned, struck, parried, every movement honed by decades of battle. Yet this enemy was no ordinary revenant. It moved with uncanny precision, anticipating his blows, matching his rhythm like a reflection come alive. It fought like him. The corpse's eyes glimmered faintly through the rot, and as it came on, Geralt glimpsed fragments of his own stance in the creature's movements. The twist of the wrist, the pivot of the heel. Each strike mirrored his own deadly grace. Elandra knelt beside the glowing runes, whispering feverishly, her voice weaving through the air like a spell. The waters surged higher, swirling with green light. "He's still bound between," she cried. "Don't kill him, you'll break the tether." "I'll do worse if he keeps swinging," Geralt grunted, driving a hard kick to the creature's knee. The revenant staggered, but did not fall. Its blade came up again, slashing for his throat. Geralt ducked low, rolled, and came up with his silver sword raised. "I'm ending this." He brought the blade down with a roar. The runes around the pool blazed suddenly bright, then shattered. The shockwave threw him backward, slamming him into the rock wall. His vision blurred. He heard Elandra scream. When the world steadied, the Revenant stood motionless at the edge of the water, its sword hanging limp in its grip. The light in its eyes faded, replaced by a dim, human confusion. The voice that emerged was hoarse but alive. "Elandra?" She stumbled forward, tears bright upon her cheeks. Yes, it's me." Geralt watched warily, silver blade still in hand. The Revenant's form wavered, the glow in its chest flickering like a dying ember. Its head turned toward him slowly. "I remember," it said, and for a heartbeat its tone was eerily calm. "White hair, yellow eyes. The Witcher." Elandra shook her head desperately. "No, he's not your enemy." But the Revenant's expression hardened, its features twisting once more with unnatural fury. "The blade must bleed before the soul can rest," it hissed. Geralt felt the air shift, cold, heavy, the scent of decay rising anew. So much for reunion. The fight renewed. The creature lunged again, faster than before, the shadows seeming to follow its blade. Geralt countered with a fluid parry, sparks bursting across the darkness. He drew the sign of Igni mid-motion, sending a stream of flame toward his foe. The fire struck full on, igniting the remnants of the Revenant's armor. It screamed, a hollow, inhuman cry, but still pressed forward, heedless of the flames. Geralt ducked aside, letting the creature's momentum carry it into the water. Steam hissed as the waves quenched the burning armor. The Witcher seized the moment, sprinted forward, and drove his silver sword through the Revenant's chest. A flare of blinding light erupted. The thing froze, the sword quivering in its ribs. Then slowly it reached up, hands trembling, and grasped Geralt's shoulders. For an instant it stared into his eyes, and in that instant Geralt saw a flash of humanity there. "Thank you," the Revenant whispered, voice breaking. "Free her." Then it crumbled. The body fell to dust that hissed as it touched the sea. Geralt staggered back, breathing hard. His medallion still quivered, but weaker now. The magic had begun to die. Elandra collapsed beside the pool, clutching the amulet at her throat. "He's gone," she whispered, voice hollow. "After all this time, gone again." Geralt wiped his blade clean and sheathed it. "You tried to bring back a soul that didn't want returning. The dead aren't meant to stay." Her eyes lifted to him, filled with despair and fury. "You don't understand what it means to lose everything." "I do," he said quietly. "But I learned long ago that grief doesn't bargain fairly." For a long moment there was only the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. Then Elandra rose, her face pale and hard. "He spoke before he faded," she murmured. "He said, 'Free her.'" Geralt frowned. "Free who?" She looked toward the broken runes where faint light still pulsed beneath the stone. "I bound his soul to mine so he would not wander alone. If he's gone, then part of me is still chained. I have to end it." The Witcher studied her. "You'll die." She gave a weary, brittle laugh. "Then perhaps that's what he meant." Before he could stop her, she stepped into the circle. The stones flared, burning white. Geralt shielded his eyes as the cavern filled with blinding light. When it faded, Elandra was gone. Only the silver tear-shaped amulet remained, floating upon the still water. He bent to retrieve it. The metal was cold but not dead. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat trapped within. He turned it over in his hand, reading the faint engraving upon its edge. In life, one name. In death, two. Outside, the storm had passed. The sky hung low and gray, the air heavy with salt. Geralt climbed the slick path back toward the town, Roach waiting where he'd left her. The gulls wheeled silently overhead, wary of the scent of magic that still lingered. When he reached the square, the mayor and the townsfolk gathered, their faces pale with fear and curiosity. "It's done?" the mayor asked. "It's done," Geralt said simply. "You've sent the dead to rest? For now?" The mayor swallowed. "And the witch? She's beyond reach." He handed over the amulet. "Bury this in the chapel vault. Don't touch it again." The man nodded quickly, clutching it as though it might burn him. Payment was fetched, coins clinking nervously into Geralt's gloved palm. By dusk, he was on the road once more, Salt View fading behind him like a dream half remembered. Yet the unease did not leave him. The whispers were gone, but in their place lingered something quieter, subtler, the echo of his own name spoken in the rustle of the wind. He camped that night on the high road overlooking the sea. The fire burned low. Roach dozed nearby. Geralt stared into the embers, thoughts heavy. The doppelganger's words returned to him. "She shaped me from memory and magic. You are the blade. I am the echo." And Alandra's last plea, free her. He did not sleep easily. Sometime before dawn, he stirred at a faint sound, a woman's voice, distant but clear, calling from the cliffs below. "Geralt of Rivia." He rose swiftly, hand on hilt, scanning the darkness. There was no one there, only the endless hiss of waves and the sigh of wind through stone. Yet as he turned away, his medallion trembled once more. Faint, almost imperceptible, he muttered under his breath, "Not done after all." And somewhere far below, buried deep in the sea-churned crypt, a whisper answered, soft and patient, "The grave remembers your name." The dawn came slow and bloodless, a pale light crawling across the horizon like the fading memory of fire. Geralt saddled Roach in silence. The air was heavy with salt and dew, the sky low and bruised. He rode north along the coast road, the cliffs falling away to his right, where the sea rolled cold and unfeeling beneath the gray morning. The wind carried no birdsong, only the dull, eternal sigh of the waves. He had thought the business in Salt View finished, but the whisper in the night had not been imagination. He had learned long ago to trust the tremor of his medallion more than dreams. Something remained, unfinished, restless. By midday he reached a crossroads marked by a weathered shrine to Militele. A merchant's cart stood overturned nearby, one wheel broken clean in half. The horse was gone, reins torn loose. Geralt dismounted, crouching beside the cart. The ground bore the marks of struggle, dragged footprints, a smear of blood leading toward the trees. He followed the trail. It wound into the forest between tall birches that swayed like pale ghosts. The smell of blood thickened, mingled with the sour stench of decay. Then he found them, two bodies sprawled beside a creek, faces pale, eyes open wide in terror. Peasants, from the look of them. One man clutched a charm of salt and fishbone in his fist. The other's chest was torn open, ribs shattered as though by claws. Geralt's medallion thrummed again, faint but steady. "Not ghouls," he murmured, examining the wounds. "Too clean, too deliberate." A rustle came from behind him. He turned, sword half drawn. A figure stood in the shadows, tall, cloaked, motionless. When it stepped forward, the light revealed a face too familiar. Geralt froze. The man was his mirror, white hair, golden eyes, the faint scar across the bridge of the nose. Yet there was something wrong in the reflection. The face was too smooth, the gaze too still, like a mask carved from his likeness. "You again," Geralt said coldly. The double inclined its head. "You killed one echo, but not the voice." Geralt raised his sword. "You're a shadow left over from her spell. You should have vanished with her." The doppelganger's lips curled faintly. "Should have. Yet her bond lingers. The soul you freed seeks another vessel." "Whose soul?" The creature's gaze flickered, almost human. "Hers." Geralt's grip tightened. "Elandra's?" It nodded slowly. "She clings to what remains of me. I am her memory now, but the grave wants its due." Before Geralt could move, the figure blurred. One instant, standing still, the next upon him. Steel met steel in a flash of light. The impact drove Geralt back against a tree, bark splintering beneath his shoulder. The creature fought with ferocity beyond the grave, matching every strike with perfect, deadly mimicry. Blades rang through the still forest. Geralt feinted low, pivoted, and slashed upward. The double vanished into smoke, reappearing behind him. A blow glanced across Geralt's armor, tearing a line through the leather. "Enough games," Geralt growled. He drew a sign with his free hand. Irden, casting a circle of violet energy upon the ground. The runes flared. When the doppelganger stepped within, its movements slowed, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. Geralt struck hard and clean. The silver blade cut through illusion, through false flesh, and the double stumbled backward, falling to its knees. It looked up, its voice strangely gentle. "You think this ends with me? The grave calls your name because it remembers mercy, because she remembers you." "I never knew her," Geralt said. The echo smiled faintly. "No, but she knew what you were. Death without hatred. She envied that." The form began to dissolve, the features melting into mist. "She waits at the water's edge," it whispered, "where the sea forgets." Then it was gone. Geralt stood alone amid the whispering birches, the last traces of magic fading into the earth. He exhaled slowly, sheathing his blade. The forest grew silent once more. He returned to the road and rode on, unease gnawing at him like hunger. The sea glimmered through breaks in the trees, dull and restless. "Where the sea forgets." The phrase lingered in his mind. It sounded like a place, perhaps a warning. By sunset, he reached a small hamlet on the cliffs, no more than a handful of huts crouched against the wind. The people watched him as though they had seen a ghost. A woman stepped forward, elderly, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. "You came from Saltview," she said, voice trembling. "The fog carries strange cries from there. The graves still murmur at night." "They shouldn't," Geralt said. "They do," she whispered, "and they say your name." He met her eyes. "Tell me, where does the sea forget?" Her hand shook as she pointed eastward, toward the jagged coastline. "There's an old lighthouse there. The keeper's long dead. Folks say the tides erase everything near it. Memory, sound, even tracks. Only the dead remember the way." Geralt nodded once. "That's where I'm headed." The woman crossed herself. "Then may the gods blind you to what waits there." He rode out beneath a bruised sky. Night fell quickly, swallowing the road in darkness. The sound of the waves grew louder as he neared the cliffs. The lighthouse came into view, a black silhouette against the dim horizon, its beacon long extinguished. He dismounted and approached on foot, each step measured. The wind howled through the hollow tower, carrying the faint scent of salt and blood. The door hung open, creaking on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was still, thick with dust and the faintest echo of whispering voices. At the base of the spiral stairs lay a single candle, burning blue. Its flame did not flicker in the wind. Beside it, a shape sat slumped against the wall, a woman's body wrapped in a travel cloak, her hair dark and braided with silver thread. Elandra. Geralt knelt beside her. Her face was pale, lips slightly parted, but there was no rot, no decay. It was as though she had fallen asleep moments ago. Around her neck hung a fragment of the same amulet he had given to the mayor, broken, hollow. He touched her wrist, no pulse, yet his medallion shivered violently, alive with unseen power. The air shifted. Geralt, a voice whispered behind him. He turned sharply. Elandra stood in the doorway, though her body still lay at his feet. Her eyes shone like stars drowned in deep water. "You freed me from the binding," she said softly, "but I cannot rest. The sea remembers what I tried to forget." He rose slowly. "You brought this on yourself." She smiled sadly. "Perhaps. Yet you came when the grave called, didn't you? You always come." He said nothing. "I need one last favor, Witcher." Her form flickered, a ghost trembling between realms. "There is a grave beyond the lighthouse where the cliffs meet the surf. He lies there still. Burn it. End it truly." "And if I do?" "Then I'll fade," she said, "and the sea will forget us both." Geralt's jaw tightened. "You're sure that's what you want?" Her gaze softened. "It's what he wanted. What I was too afraid to grant." The wind moaned through the tower. Geralt nodded once. "Show me." Elandra turned toward the door, her translucent figure leading him out into the night. The sea roared below, endless and dark. Far beneath the cliffs, faint blue light shimmered through the mist, where something waited, buried in the sand and sorrow. The Witcher followed without another word. The night was thick with salt and whispers. The sea crashed far below the cliffs, its endless roar broken only by the cry of gulls lost in the dark. Geralt followed the spectral shimmer of Elandra's form as she drifted ahead, pale as moonlight. She did not turn, did not speak. Her bare feet left no prints in the wet grass. Only the faint echo of her passing marked the path down toward the shore. The trail was treacherous, narrow, half swallowed by weeds and slick with spray. The Witcher moved carefully, boots silent upon the stone. Every few steps his medallion quivered against his chest, as if stirred by invisible fingers. The closer they came to the sea, the stronger the tremor grew. At last the ground leveled, and the cliffs opened into a small cove. The moon hung low, painting the waves in shades of steel and glass. There, where the surf clawed at the sand, stood a single grave. No marker, no cross, only a mound of stone bound by seaweed and shells. A cold mist drifted above it like breath. Elandra stopped before the grave. Her eyes glimmered with faint light. "This is where I buried him," she said, "after the storm took his ship. I bound his spirit so he would not wander, but the spell twisted. It drew others, and they would not rest." Geralt glanced at the mound. "You meant well. That doesn't make it right." Her expression softened, tinged with sorrow. "I know that now. That's why I called you." He knelt beside the grave, brushing aside the wet seaweed. Beneath, he found shards of rusted armor and what looked like the remnants of a sword, its hilt broken clean. The steel had been corroded by salt and time, yet faint traces of runes lingered along the blade, old words of warding, their meaning long lost. "Soldier?" Geralt asked. Elandra nodded. "He fought for Kerak. They called him Valen of Harn, brave, foolish, kind. I found his body among the wreckage and could not bear to let the sea take him." The Witcher stood. "You bound his soul, and in doing so you bound the sea's memory to yours." Her voice trembled. "Yes, the sea remembers everything. It never forgets the drowned." Geralt drew a circle in the sand with the tip of his sword, marking it with careful precision. The signs were old, exorcism patterns he had learned long ago from priests who barely understood their own prayers. "When I burn this grave, it'll break the last tether," he said. "If you stay near, it'll take you too." "That is my wish." He studied her face. "There's no undoing death, not even for love." Elandra smiled faintly. "Witcher, love is the only thing that ever tried." The wind shifted, bringing a sudden chill. The mist thickened, swirling around them in ghostly coils. The waves grew louder, crashing against the stones with hungry rhythm. Geralt felt his medallion vibrate violently. "Something's coming," he said. Elandra closed her eyes. "He knows. He doesn't want to let go." The grave began to move. Stones tumbled aside, rolling into the surf. A low sound rose from beneath the earth, a moan that grew into a wail, full of rage and longing. The sand split and a figure clawed its way upward, half-formed, half-shadow. It was Valen, or what remained of him. His eyes burned blue, his skin pale as driftwood. Seaweed clung to his armor and water streamed from the holes in his chest. His voice was a hollow whisper carried on the wind. "Elandra." She took a step forward, hands trembling. "Valen, my heart, it's over. You must rest." The wraith shook its head slowly. "You promised." "I promised to keep you safe," she said, tears glinting like glass. "But I trapped you instead. I can't undo that except by fire." The ghost turned its gaze toward Geralt, and for a heartbeat the Witcher saw not hatred but confusion, a lost soul clinging to what remained of itself. "You would take her from me," it hissed. Geralt raised his hand. "No, I'll only take what's already gone." The wraith shrieked and lunged. Geralt met it with steel. The silver blade cut through the mist, leaving trails of burning light in its wake. The wraith struck back with icy claws that scraped against the Witcher's armor, leaving lines of frost. He cast Igni. The sign burst into flame, flaring bright against the dark. The wraith recoiled, howling. Elandra raised her hands, chanting words that cracked like thunder. Magic and flame merged, lighting the cove in blinding brilliance. The wraith faltered, its shape unraveling. "Elandra," it gasped, its voice smaller now, breaking apart with each word. "Stay with me." She shook her head, tears falling freely. "Always, my love, but not here." With one last cry, the wraith dissolved into mist, scattering across the sea. The waves calmed, the wind fell silent. Geralt stood still for a long moment, sword lowered, the smell of salt and ash thick in the air. Elandra's form flickered. The glow that surrounded her began to fade. She looked at him, her expression peaceful for the first time. "Thank you, Witcher." Geralt wiped his blade clean. "You'll find peace now." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. Perhaps. The sea forgets slowly. Then she was gone. The light collapsed inward, leaving only the whisper of the tide and the faint scent of burned air. The grave lay silent, smoke rising from its blackened stones. Geralt stood alone, staring at the place where she had vanished. He waited until the first rays of dawn touched the waves before turning away. By the time he climbed back to the cliffs, the cove below had already begun to fade beneath the morning mist. It was as if the sea were erasing the memory of what had transpired. He mounted Roach, the mare stamping impatiently against the cold ground. He rode without haste, the wind whipping his cloak. The road led inland through hills silvered with dew. He passed a shepherd tending his flock and nodded silently. The man crossed himself and looked away. By afternoon, the forest returned, dense and quiet, the air thick with pine and resin. Geralt found a stream and stopped to drink. As he crouched beside the water, he noticed something half buried in the mud. It was a seashell, white, smooth, unbroken. Strange, this far from the coast. He turned it in his hand. Inside, faint as the sigh of distant waves, came a whisper. Geralt of Rivia. He dropped it into the current and watched it drift away. That night he made camp beneath an old oak. The fire crackled softly, its light painting golden arcs upon his face. The world was quiet again, but he could not shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching from beyond the dark. Before sleep took him, he reached for his sword, tracing the worn runes along its edge. He remembered Alandra's words, "Love is the only thing that ever tried." He slept lightly, and in his dreams he stood upon the shore once more. The sea was calm, the grave gone, the tide whispering secrets in a language older than men. And somewhere in the depths, a woman's voice spoke gently. "Thank you, Witcher. The sea remembers, but now it forgives." When dawn came, the tide had risen high enough to wash away every trace of footprints upon the cliffs. And though Geralt rode on, the whisper lingered in the wind like a farewell, the last echo of the grave that had once called his name. The road wound east through the marshlands, where reeds whispered secrets to the wind and the sky hung low with the promise of rain. Geralt rode in silence, Roach's steady gait carrying him between pools of stagnant water that mirrored the colorless clouds above. He had left the sea behind, yet the scent of salt seemed to cling to him still, as though the ocean refused to forget. The Witcher's thoughts wandered, though his eyes remained sharp upon the trail. He had buried many things in his life, men, monsters, memories, but the events of Saltview felt different. The sea had taken more than lives, it had taken meaning. The world had gone strangely quiet after Alandra's spirit faded. Too quiet, as if waiting for the echo of her magic to die completely. But Witchers knew silence was rarely safe. He reached a fork in the road by dusk, marked by a crooked signpost, leaning drunkenly under its own weight. One arm pointed toward a village called Renvale, another toward the ruins of a keep whose name had long since faded from the wood. The third arm, splintered and half-rotten, bore no name at all, only a symbol carved deep into the grain, a tear-shaped mark. Geralt felt a stir in his medallion, faint but distinct. He stared at the symbol. The same design had been etched into Alandra's amulet. "Not done yet," he muttered. He turned Roach toward the nameless path. The trail grew rougher as he rode, swallowed by mist that rose from the bogs. Trees loomed like giants half drowned in the mire, their branches heavy with moss. Here and there he glimpsed the remnants of old stone walls, their purpose forgotten. The air grew colder, damp with the rot of things that had waited too long to die. Night descended swiftly, swallowing the last light. Geralt dismounted and led Roach to a patch of firmer ground where a ruined chapel stood, its spire cracked, its bell long fallen. He built a small fire in the shelter of the wall, the smoke curling upward in thin ribbons. The wind moaned through the broken arches, a hollow, grieving sound. As he ate a strip of dried meat, something moved in the corner of his vision, a flicker of light, faint and green, drifting between the trees, a will-o'-wisp, common in these parts, but rarely alone. Geralt rose, hand on the hilt of his sword. The wisp hovered at the edge of the clearing, pulsing like a living heartbeat. Then, as if aware of his gaze, it began to drift away. He followed. The marsh swallowed sound. Only the faint squelch of his boots and the rhythmic pulse of the wisp broke the stillness. It led him through reeds, taller than a man, through pools, where the moonlight glimmered like shards of broken glass. Then at last it stopped. Before him lay a half-sunken stone bridge spanning a narrow ravine. Beneath it, black water flowed, sluggish and foul. The wisp hovered above the center, flickering wildly as though caught in an unseen struggle. Geralt drew a sign and whispered the word for light. A soft glow bloomed from his palm, casting pale radiance across the bridge. Something stirred below. The water shivered, then bulged upward as a shape rose from the depths. A woman's form, pale as the moon, hair floating around her like dark kelp. Her eyes glowed faintly, the same blue as Alandra's had in death. "Witcher," she said, her voice a ripple through the air. "You freed the bound one, yet his chain was linked to others." Geralt's hand stayed on his sword. "Who are you?" "The sea's daughter," the specter whispered. "I am what remains when love defies death." Elandra's spell reached farther than she knew. It touched the marsh, the river, the very veins of the land. Geralt's frown deepened. "You're saying she awakened more than her lover?" The spirit nodded slowly. "The grave whispers still, but now it whispers through water. The drowned are restless. They remember your name." The wisp dimmed suddenly, as if in warning. From the murky depths, shapes began to rise, figures cloaked in weed and mud, their eyes burning faintly beneath rotted flesh. Drowners, a dozen of them. Geralt drew silver. "So the sea has sent its cousins." He moved before the first one reached the shore. The blade flashed, cutting through water and rot alike. The nearest drowner shrieked, its cry bubbling into gurgles as it fell apart. Another lunged from the side. Geralt pivoted, cleaving its head cleanly. They came fast, claws raking, jaws snapping. He fought in silence, every strike precise, each motion economical. Steel sang. Water hissed. When the last corpse fell back into the mire, Geralt stood alone once more, breath steady, sword dripping with black ichor. The ghost still hovered above the bridge, her gaze unreadable. "You fight what cannot truly die." Geralt wiped his blade and sheathed it. "Everything dies. Eventually." She drifted closer. "Then you will see. The water remembers her, as the earth remembers you." Before he could ask more, she vanished, scattering into a dozen small lights that faded into the mist. He returned to the ruined chapel and rekindled the fire, but sleep came slowly. Dreams haunted him. The sea rising to swallow the land, Elandra standing upon the waves, whispering his name. Beneath her feet, the dead stirred like leaves in the wind. When dawn came gray and uncertain, Geralt found the marsh transformed. The fog was thicker, the air heavy with the stench of brine. The stream that had run quietly the night before now surged with unnatural strength, its waters laced with foam like sea spittle. He mounted Roach and followed its course north. The path narrowed to a corridor of twisted trees, their roots knotted like old bones. The current beside him grew swifter, louder, until it ended abruptly at a waterfall that plunged into a deep black pool. At its edge stood a shrine, newer than the rest of the ruins, yet weathered by the same salt-stained air. Upon its stone surface lay an offering bowl filled with shells. In its center rested a small, familiar trinket, a silver tear cracked down the middle. Geralt dismounted and picked it up. The moment his fingers closed around the metal, his medallion quaked violently. The air darkened. From the water rose a voice, soft and distant. Geralt of Rivia, why do you run from what you've already buried? He looked up. The surface of the pool rippled, and out of it stepped a shape. Not Elandra this time, but himself. Not the doppelganger he had slain, but a new reflection. Older, grimmer, eyes hollow as if carved from stone. The echo smiled without warmth. She waits below, where the waters end. You freed her, and in doing so, freed me. Geralt drew steel, though he knew its edge would do little against illusions. You're no ghost. What are you? I am what the grave made of you, the echo replied. You carried her memory. The sea carried mine. Together we were called. The wind rose, scattering dead leaves across the stones. The reflection stepped closer, its form flickering with each breath. You think you've escaped her curse. You haven't. The sea forgets slowly, Witcher, and the dead forget not at all. Then the echo was gone, swallowed by the mist and the roar of the falls. Geralt stood alone, the cracked amulet heavy in his hand. He turned it once more, watching the faint gleam of its fractured surface. The sea forgets slowly, he murmured, echoing her words. He slipped the trinket into his pouch, mounted Roach, and turned north again. The wind carried the scent of salt even here, far from the coast, and somewhere behind him, deep within the marsh, the water stirred, quietly at first, then with the slow rhythm of a heartbeat, as if something vast had begun to wake beneath the surface. By the third day the land had changed. The marshlands fell away to low, wind-swept moors, where the grass grew in the tough, silvery tufts, and the soil was dark as ink. The horizon stretched empty and endless, broken only by the crooked outline of a ruined tower that rose from the hills like a broken tooth. Geralt had seen many such ruins, forgotten outposts of long-dead kingdoms, but this one stood too close to the source of the whispers to ignore. The Witcher guided Roach up the slope, the wind whipping his cloak. The air was sharper here and faintly metallic, the scent of brine lingering like a wound that would not heal. When he reached the summit, he dismounted and scanned the landscape. To the west, the moors gave way to the faint shimmer of water. Another lake, perhaps, or the edge of a flooded valley. To the east, the hills darkened into forest. The ruin before him was a shell of gray stone, its archways crumbling, its roof long devoured by time. He approached slowly, sword hand loose but ready. The wind moaned through the gaps in the walls, carrying a strange undertone, a low hum, rhythmic, alive. It reminded him of a heart that had forgotten to stop beating. Inside, the floor was strewn with rubble, moss, and the bones of birds. Yet at the center of the ruined hall, something incongruous gleamed beneath the dust. A mirror, tall, cracked, framed in silver. It stood upright, unbroken, its surface dark as oil. Geralt's medallion trembled. He stopped a few paces away. Mirrors, he knew, had power, especially those untouched by age. This one felt awake. From behind him, came the faint sound of footsteps. He turned, blade half drawn, but saw no one, only the empty doorway, and beyond it the barren moor. Then the voice came. "Still you chase the dead, Witcher." He turned back. The mirror had changed. The reflection within was not his own, but that of Elandra, her face pale and calm, her eyes deep pools of blue light. "You burned my grave," she said softly. "But fire cannot cleanse memory. The water remembers, and memory is the truest form of life." Geralt's jaw tightened. "You're no more than a shadow." "Then perhaps," she murmured, "you should fear me less, and yourself more." The mirror rippled, and for an instant her image shifted. The face that looked back at him was his own, but older, scarred in places where no scar yet lay. The eyes were tired, their light dimmed. "This is what the grave whispers," the reflection said in his voice. "Your name spoken not by others, but by the world itself. It calls because it remembers what you've taken from it." Geralt said nothing. He'd seen too many illusions born of grief, magic, and guilt. He stepped closer and raised his hand. "Enough!" The mirror's surface rippled again, the images shattering like water struck by a stone. Then from within, a shadow emerged, long fingers pressing outward against the glass, distorting its surface. The mirror bulged, cracked, and broke open like a wound. Something stepped through. It was not Elandra, nor was it his double. It was a thing made of both. A figure shaped like a man, but its flesh was water and smoke. Its hair was white as salt, its eyes two pits of blue fire. When it spoke, its voice echoed with a dozen tones, male and female, living and dead. "We are what you freed," it said. "Bound together, sea and sword, grief and grave. You ended one curse only to birth another." Geralt drew silver in a single motion. "Then I'll end this one too." The creature tilted its head. "You cannot kill what remembers you. Every drop of rain, every whisper of the sea carries your name. You have become part of the grave you sought to silence." It lunged. The Witcher moved to meet it, steel flashing in the half-light. The blade struck true, but where it met flesh, the creature's form dissolved into mist, only to reform behind him. A blow like a wave struck his back, hurling him against the wall. Geralt rolled, came up on one knee, and slashed again. This time the sword carved a bright arc of silver fire through the creature's chest. It screamed, not in pain but in fury, and the air grew suddenly thick with moisture. Rain fell from nowhere, hissing as it struck the heated silver. "Enough of this," he snarled, tracing a sign. The circle of Yrden flared beneath him, violet light anchoring the magic. The creature faltered as it stepped within the glyph, its form shuddering. Geralt advanced, each strike now landing solidly. With a final powerful blow, he drove the sword through its heart. The thing convulsed, the blue fire in its eyes dimming. "The sea forgets nothing," it whispered before its body collapsed into a flood of water that hissed and vanished upon the stones. Geralt lowered his sword. Steam rose from the cracked floor. The mirror stood dark once more, its surface marred by a spiderweb of fractures. He stood still, breathing deeply. The hum that had filled the ruins faded, replaced by the whisper of wind and the slow drip of rain through broken stone. He sheathed his weapon, glanced once more at the shattered mirror, and turned to leave. Outside, the air was heavy, the sky low. The moor spread endless before him, veiled in gray. Yet as he mounted Roach and began to ride, he felt the ground beneath the mare's hooves tremble, not from thunder, but from something deeper, older. The water seeping through the moor glistened faintly as though alive. By nightfall, he reached the edge of a small lake. Its surface was smooth as glass, reflecting the dying light of the sun. He dismounted, crouched, and dipped a hand into the water. It was warm, not natural for this region. When he withdrew it, droplets clung to his fingers longer than they should have, like something reluctant to let go. In the lake's reflection, he thought for an instant he saw another face beside his own, a woman's, pale and faint, watching him with unreadable eyes. He turned sharply, but there was no one there, only Roach grazing nearby, unbothered. The Witcher sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Enough ghosts for one lifetime," he muttered. Still, as he made camp by the lake shore, he could not shake the feeling of being observed. When the fire burned low, the wind carried faint sounds, soft murmurs, almost words, rising and fading like the tide. He closed his eyes and tried to ignore them, but the voice that whispered through the reeds was unmistakable. "Geralt of Rivia," it said, gentle and near. "The grave does not call your name in hate. It calls in memory, because you too belong to it." He opened his eyes, staring into the darkness. The wind stilled. The lake lay silent. Geralt rose and tossed another branch into the flames. Sparks leapt into the night, carried away by the wind, perhaps toward the sea, perhaps toward the dead. He sat again, silent, eyes distant. When dawn came, the lake was gone. Only dry earth remained where the water had been, cracked and barren, and upon that earth, pressed into the mud as if by unseen hands, lay a single silver tear. Geralt picked it up slowly, the same mark as before, the same curse perhaps. He slipped it into his pouch without a word and mounted Roach. The road ahead was long, the sky dim with gathering clouds. Behind him the wind rose once more, carrying with it the faintest echo of the sea, soft, unending, and whispering his name. The wind had turned colder. Clouds rolled in from the west, dragging a gray veil across the sky, and the faint taste of rain carried with it the scent of distant salt. Geralt rode in silence, cloak drawn close, his mind heavy with questions he did not care to voice aloud. The strange events of the moor, Elandra's reflection, the creature born of her and his shadow, the silver tear that would not leave his thoughts, had left a weight on him heavier than steel. He had fought many monsters, yet this one lingered without form, creeping into dreams, whispering in stillness. By noon, the path bent south toward the foothills. Ahead lay a cluster of trees, the first he had seen in miles, black oaks whose twisted branches clutched at the sky like hands. Beneath their boughs stood an old milestone, half buried in moss. The carved words were worn beyond recognition, but below them gleamed something new, another tear-shaped symbol carved deep, the groove still clean, as if made yesterday. Geralt's medallion stirred. He dismounted, crouched, and traced the mark with his gloved fingers. The stone was warm to the touch. He straightened, scanning the woods. The oaks creaked under a wind that seemed not to touch him. He heard it then, a sound half hidden beneath the rustle of branches. A faint, rhythmic pulse. It might have been the wind or a heartbeat. He drew his steel sword, its surface dark with reflected rainlight. "Show yourself." The forest answered with silence. Then came the laughter, soft, distant, unmistakably human. Geralt turned toward it, moving soundlessly between the trees. The laughter grew louder, drifting ahead like a trail of smoke. When it stopped, he found himself in a clearing where the grass grew black and brittle. In the center stood a single oak, massive and gnarled, its trunk carved with dozens of strange runes. From one branch hung a charm, woven reeds bound in silver thread shaped like a tear. He stepped closer. The moment he crossed the clearing's edge, the ground shifted beneath his boots. A ripple passed through the air, and suddenly the forest was gone. He stood instead upon a shore. The sea roared before him, dark and endless, the horizon a scar of light. Behind him the oaks had become pillars of stone. He recognized the scent of the place, the same salt and iron that had haunted him since Saltview. "Geralt," said a voice behind him. He turned. Elandra stood there whole and alive, her eyes bright, her skin touched by sunlight. The sea wind lifted her hair, and for a heartbeat, she looked as she might have before magic had undone her. "This isn't real," he said. Her smile was sad. "No, but does that matter?" He took a slow step forward, watching her carefully. "You're dead. I burned your grave." "Yes," she said softly. "You freed me from the binding, but the sea keeps its debts, Witcher. When it gives back what was lost, it demands a price." "The sea again," he muttered. "Always the sea. It remembers everything, every death, every lie, even yours." He frowned. "I'm still breathing." "Are you?" she asked gently. The world shuddered, the sky darkened, the sea turned black as ink. Elandra's form wavered, and for a moment her face was not hers. It was his, older and worn, the same reflection he had seen in the mirror. "Your name was written long before you came to Saltview," the voice said, though her lips did not move. "The grave did not call you by chance. It called you home." Geralt felt the air tighten around him. He reached for his sword, but the blade weighed as if made of stone. The waves surged forward, rising higher, curling into shapes, hands, faces, memories. Each whispered his name in voices that were not his own. He forced himself to move, to breathe, to think. "Illusion," he growled. "A spell. I've seen worse." The sea laughed, 1,000 voices in unison. "You've seen nothing. You hunt what you do not understand. You kill what you fear. Yet what hunts you now cannot die." Lightning split the clouds, striking the water. The shock flung him backward. He hit the sand hard, the taste of salt in his mouth. When he looked up, Elandra was gone. In her place stood the shadow, his shadow, its eyes burning faintly blue. "You thought you destroyed me," it said, "but you only scattered the pieces. I am in the water, in the graves, in the memory of every death you've left behind." Geralt rose slowly, drawing the silver sword, despite the weight, dragging at his arm. "Then you'll have to fight for the right to stay." The shadow grinned. "I already have." It lunged. Steel met smoke. The impact sent shockwaves across the shore, scattering the illusions of the dead. Geralt fought with grim precision, each strike faster, heavier. The creature matched him blow for blow, a reflection moving half a heartbeat ahead of him. Sparks flew. The air burned with magic. He cast Quen, the sign flaring gold. The next blow struck the shield and broke apart in a flash of light. Geralt drove his sword through the opening, the silver cutting deep into shadow. The creature screamed, its voice fracturing into echoes. "You can't kill what's part of you," it gasped. "Watch me." He twisted the blade and drove it upward. The shadow exploded into mist, scattering like smoke before wind. The world tilted, the sea collapsing in on itself. For a heartbeat, everything was silence. Then came the fall. When he woke, he was lying beneath the oak again, the charm still swaying from the branch above him. The forest was silent save for the whisper of rain. His sword lay beside him, its edge blackened with ash. Geralt pushed himself up, every muscle aching. His medallion was still. Whatever magic had filled the clearing was gone or sleeping. He took down the charm and studied it. The reeds were damp, the silver thread tarnished. Inside it, faint light pulsed, a dying heartbeat. "Still clinging, are you?" he murmured. He dropped the charm into the fire he kindled at his feet. It burned quickly, the silver melting into nothing. For a long while he watched the smoke drift upward, twisting into the gray sky. It smelled of brine. When the fire died, he mounted Roach and rode on, leaving the clearing behind. The road led deeper into the hills, where fog gathered thick and white. Night came swiftly. The moon rose pale above the mist, and in its light the path shimmered faintly, as if wet, though the air was dry. He heard the sea again, though it was miles away, and under the rhythm of its distant roar, faint but certain, a whisper followed him. Not a voice this time, just a name carried upon the wind. His name. He did not look back. By dawn he reached higher ground. Below him the mists stretched like a sleeping ocean. Somewhere beneath that pale shroud lay Salt View, the marshes, the graves, and all that the sea had claimed. He felt their weight still, like a hand upon his shoulder. He touched the hilt of his sword and said quietly, "You'll have to wait your turn." Then he rode east toward the rising sun as the sea sighed behind him, endless, patient, and remembering. The mountains rose before him like teeth gnawing at the sky, jagged peaks crowned in mist, slopes scarred by centuries of wind and rain. It was said the old gods had shaped them when the world was young, their hammer blows ringing still in the thunder that rolled between the crags. Geralt had no use for such tales, yet he felt the age of the place all the same. The road narrowed into a stony path, climbing ever higher, and the air grew thin and sharp. For 3 days he rode through the passes, meeting no one. The world here was empty of men. Only ravens haunted the skies, and their cries echoed like laughter from the cliffs. Streams tumbled from the heights, their waters white as milk, cold enough to bite. The Witcher drank from them without thought, though the taste carried a faint bitterness, as though the mountain itself watched and disapproved. On the 4th evening, the path opened upon a wide valley where a river wound like a silver serpent through fields gone wild. At its center stood a village, or what had been one. Only blackened timbers remained jutting from the ground like ribs. Smoke no longer rose from the chimneys. The roofs had caved, the well lay choked with ash. Geralt dismounted, tying Roach to the remains of a fence. The earth here was strange, soft, damp, and warm beneath his boots despite the cold air. The medallion against his chest quivered faintly. Something had died here recently. Many things, perhaps. He moved among the ruins, eyes sweeping the ground. Scorched bones, shattered pottery, the faint gleam of metal half buried in soot. Signs of fire, yes, but not one started by torches or siege. The pattern was too irregular, the burn too deep. He crouched beside a collapsed doorway and brushed aside the ash. The wood beneath was melted smooth, fused with stone. He rose slowly. "Not fire," he muttered, "magic." The wind shifted, bringing a whisper, not words, not quite. A tone, a rhythm he had heard before, the low hum of water beneath the earth, the sea's echo, even here among the peaks. He turned toward the sound and saw it, a shimmer in the air beyond the ruins, faint as heat haze. He walked toward it, and the world flickered. The valley vanished. He stood upon a frozen shore, the sky black as obsidian. The sea stretched out before him, dead and motionless, Ice covered it in sheets that groaned with unseen movement. Far off, a faint light glimmered, blue and cold. He knew this place. It was not real, but memory given shape. A voice drifted across the ice. "You came far, Witcher?" He turned. Alandra stood upon the shore, her hair unbound, her form half shrouded in mist. The same face, the same eyes, but her expression had changed. There was no sorrow now, only calm, vast as the sea itself. "I told you the sea forgets slowly," she said. Geralt's breath misted in the cold air. "You should be gone. I freed you." "You freed what was bound," she replied, "not what was owed." The ice cracked beneath his boots as he stepped closer. "What debt?" "Yours." He frowned. "I owe nothing to the dead." Her gaze softened. "Don't you? Every soul you've sent to rest, every monster slain, every curse broken, they all cling to you, Geralt. The world remembers, the sea remembers. And now, so do I." He shook his head. "You talk in riddles. Because truth frightens even witchers." She stepped closer, her feet not touching the ice. "You are marked by the same spell that bound me. When you burned the grave, when you broke the circle, the power did not vanish. It took root. In you." His medallion vibrated violently, a deep, steady hum that set his teeth on edge. "Lies," he said, though doubt coiled in his chest. Alandra smiled faintly. "Tell yourself that when the waters rise." The ice beneath them shuddered. Cracks spidered outward, glowing blue from within. The light grew until it blinded him. When he could see again, she was gone. He stood once more in the ruined village, the wind howling through the empty frames of the houses. The shimmer in the air had vanished. But the river now ran faster, its waters no longer silver but dark, the same black hue as the sea in his vision. Geralt wiped the frost from his beard. Wonderful. He returned to Roach, mounted, and rode hard for the eastern ridge. He needed distance between himself and that place, yet the further he rode, the more the land changed. Patches of ground gleamed wet where there should have been frost. The river followed him, winding beside the road like a serpent. He could hear it whispering beneath the stones, though no mouth spoke. By nightfall, he reached an abandoned way station, little more than a stone arch and a crumbling wall. He made camp there, the fire crackling weakly against the wind. As he ate, the river's murmur grew louder. When he rose to fetch more wood, he saw that the stream had swollen, creeping closer to the camp. He stared at it. The surface rippled faintly, and in its depths glowed a blue light. Geralt drew his silver sword and approached. The water stilled. Then, without warning, a hand shot from the river and seized his wrist. He jerked back, blade flashing. The water burst upward in a column, taking the shape of a woman, tall, beautiful, and terrible. Her eyes burned with sea fire. "You cannot flee the tide," she said. "It follows its name." He slashed through her. The blade passed harmlessly, scattering droplets that hissed against the fire. The water reformed, her expression unreadable. "You carry her mark," she said. "You are the echo of her sin. Then tell me how to silence it." She smiled, and it was not kind. "Silence cannot live without death. One must drown that the other may rest." Her form dissolved into mist, and the river receded, as though retreating from the truth it had spoken. Geralt stood for a long while, staring at the dark current. His medallion pulsed once, then stilled. He sat beside the fire until dawn, the flames burning low. Sleep would not come. When the first light touched the peaks, he mounted Roach and turned east once more. He did not look back at the river. By midday, the path descended into a valley carpeted with heather. The air smelled faintly of salt again, though the sea was leagues away. On the far side stood an ancient chapel, half buried by earth, its steeple broken. He rode toward it, drawn by instinct more than reason. As he neared, he saw carvings along the stones, old symbols of the sea, of storms and loss. In the chapel's shadow sat an old man cloaked in gray, a fishing net coiled beside him. His eyes were pale, blind perhaps, but they followed Geralt's every movement. "You've come far, Witcher," the man said, his voice dry as driftwood. "Too far to turn back now?" Geralt dismounted. "You know me?" "I know the name the sea whispers," the old man replied. "And I know what it seeks. She waits for you at the heart of the tide." Geralt's gaze hardened. "Elandra?" The old man nodded. "Go to the valley beyond. When the sun sets, the water will return. Then you will see the truth of what you carry." Before Geralt could question further, the man faded, dissolving into wind and dust. Only the net remained, empty. The Witcher sighed, rubbing at his temples. Spirits and riddles, always riddles. Still he mounted and rode toward the far valley. The ground there was dry, cracked, barren. Yet as the sun fell, the first glimmer of water appeared upon the surface, rivulets snaking together, gathering into pools. The tide was coming in, though no sea lay near. He waited, silent as the valley filled. The water rose smooth and black, swallowing the stones, until it mirrored the sky. Then, from its depths, light began to glow, cold, blue, and familiar. Elandra's voice came once more clear as a bell. "Geralt of Rivia, the grave whispers not your death, but your beginning." The surface rippled, and beneath it, shapes began to stir. The sun sank behind the mountains, and the valley drowned in blue twilight. Geralt sat astride Roach at the edge of the forming lake, watching as the water crept upward over the stones. It moved with deliberate grace, not in waves, but in a slow, rising breath, as if the earth itself exhaled the sea from its lungs. The reflection of the fading sky shimmered on the surface, and beneath it something glowed faintly. Lines of light, curling like runes across the deep. He dismounted, tethered Roach to a broken pillar, and stepped to the water's edge. His medallion vibrated steadily, warning of strong magic. He had felt this kind of power before, in cursed keeps, on battlefields thick with death, but never so pure, so patient. This was not the rage of wild sorcery. It was memory, old and vast. He knelt, dipped his fingers into the rising water. It was neither cold nor warm, and when he lifted his hand, the drops that clung to his glove glimmered faintly before fading. The surface rippled, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw his reflection, but the face that looked back was not his own. It was younger, untouched by scars. The eyes were calm, almost kind. "You see what was?" came a voice behind him, soft and familiar. He turned. Elandra stood a few paces away, her figure more solid than before, no longer the wavering phantom he had met in Saltview's graveyard. Her feet touched the water, yet no ripple spread beneath them. "I see what shouldn't be," Geralt said. She tilted her head, studying him. "And yet you follow it still. You could have turned away long ago." He straightened. "You dragged me here." "I called," she said simply. "You answered. That is different." Geralt's gaze swept the water, the valley, the faint glow deep below. "What is this place?" "The heart of the tide," she replied, "where the sea's memory gathers. Every river, every storm, every drowned soul ends here. And now so do you." "Not yet," he muttered. Elandra's eyes softened, but her tone held no mercy. "You carry my mark, Geralt." When you burned my grave, you took part of the binding into yourself. It has grown inside you, rooted like coral. That is why the waters rise. They answer to what you are becoming." He frowned, his hand unconsciously brushing the medallion at his chest. It pulsed faintly in rhythm with the water. "Then tell me how to end it." "To end it," she said, "you must return what was taken. The sea does not forgive theft." "What did I take?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "My death." Lightning flickered behind the distant peaks, silent and pale. The valley trembled. Beneath the water, shapes began to stir, figures faint and wavering, their outlines dissolving with every movement. The drowned. Soldiers in rusted armor, fishermen with ropes still knotted around their wrists, women clutching infants of air and shadow. They gathered around the Witcher, their eyes pale and blind. "They are bound by my spell," Elandra said. "By your hand they can be freed." "Freed how?" "By surrender." Geralt's jaw tightened. "Not an option." The air shimmered. The drowned began to move closer, their steps silent, their forms breaking into spray. Elandra's expression did not change. "You can fight them if you wish, but the sea will keep rising. It will follow you wherever you go. Every grave, every tide, every dream, until the name it calls becomes truth." He unsheathed silver, the blade gleaming dull in the dying light. "Then it'll have to earn it." The first of the drowned lunged, and the water erupted. Geralt moved like lightning, blade flashing, cutting through air and mist. Each strike met resistance, the steel singing as it tore through forms that reformed as quickly as they fell. The water hissed, boiling where his sword touched it, but still they came. Elandra's voice echoed above the chaos. "You cannot kill what does not live." "Watch me," he growled, slashing through another phantom. The figures began to waver, losing shape. The light beneath the water dimmed, then flared bright enough to blind him. When the glare faded, he stood alone once more. The lake was still. The air smelled of rain and ozone. Elandra stood across from him, her expression unreadable. "You will always fight," she said quietly, "even when the battle is yourself." He wiped the blade and sheathed it. "That's what I was made for." A long silence followed. Then she spoke again, her voice softer, as though it came from a great distance. "The curse can be broken, but it will not be without cost." Geralt crossed his arms. "There's always a cost. You must return to where it began," she said. "To Saltview. The storm that started this waits still upon the sea. Burn the amulet where it fell, and the tide will recede. Refuse, and the sea will claim the land piece by piece until all is one grave." He studied her face. "And you?" "I will fade. Truly this time." Something in her tone, relief perhaps, made him pause. "That's what you want?" "It's what should have been," she whispered. "You gave me rest once. Now finish it." The glow around her dimmed, and she began to dissolve, her form scattering into threads of light that drifted toward the water. "Farewell, Witcher. Elandra." But she was gone. The valley darkened as clouds gathered. Thunder rolled again closer now. Geralt stood for a moment longer, staring at the still water. Then he turned, mounted Roach, and began the long descent back toward the coast. Rain began to fall before dawn. It came first in whispers, then in sheets, drumming against his cloak and the horse's flanks. The road blurred beneath the downpour, but he pressed on, his thoughts heavy. The medallion at his chest pulsed faintly in time with his heartbeat. By the second night he reached the cliffs above Saltview. The sea raged below. black waves hammering the rocks. The village lay in ruins. The storm had done its work well, yet the scent of death that once haunted it was gone. Only the salt remained. He found the path down to the cove where Alandra's grave had been. The fire he had lit there weeks before had burned everything but a circle of stone. Within it lay nothing now, no bones, no relics, save one small gleam, a silver tear. Geralt dismounted, crouched, and picked it up. The metal was warm, alive almost. He stared at it for a long time before drawing flint and tinder. The fire came slow in the rain, but once it caught, it burned blue, steady against the wind. He dropped the amulet into the flames. The sea answered. Waves rose, towering, and broke upon the cliffs with the force of an army. The sky split with lightning, and the earth trembled beneath his feet. He stood unmoving, cloak whipping in the gale until the fire died. Then slowly the storm began to fade. The wind softened, the waves retreated. When silence came again, it was complete. No whispers, no voices, only the distant cry of gulls. Geralt turned away from the ashes and climbed back to Roach. The dawn broke as he reached the ridge, painting the world in pale gold. The sea below was calm for the first time since he'd come to Saltview. He looked out over it for a while, then said quietly, "Sleep now." And though no answer came, he thought the waves seemed to bow as they withdrew from the shore. The storm had passed, leaving the world rinsed in gray light. Mist drifted low over the cliffs, soft as breath, and the scent of salt clung to everything, the grass, the stones, even the leather of Roach's saddle. Geralt rode slowly along the high path that followed the coast, the sea murmuring far below. Behind him, Saltview lay quiet, half submerged in the aftermath of its ruin. Ahead stretched only the road, and beyond that, silence. The Witcher should have felt relief. The curse was broken. The graves lay still, the whispers gone. The sea at peace for the first time in weeks. Yet peace had never sat easily on his shoulders. His medallion hung still against his chest, but he felt its absence like a missing heartbeat. It was as if the world had grown too quiet, and quiet could be dangerous. He stopped at the edge of a rise where the land bent downward into a shallow hollow. From there, he could see the remnants of an old beacon, another of the coast's abandoned watchfires. He dismounted, letting Roach graze while he approached the stones. The air was damp and smelled faintly of soot. Someone had lit a fire here not long ago. He crouched beside the ashes and found something half buried among them, a small, smooth shell, white as bone. He turned it over in his palm. The spiral glistened faintly, catching what little light the morning offered. When he brought it close to his ear, he heard not the echo of the sea, but a single whisper. His name, drawn out like a sigh. Geralt dropped the shell into the ashes and ground it beneath his boot. No more. The wind rose as if in answer. He returned to Roach and continued along the cliff road. The sun climbed higher but gave no warmth. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries distant. The trail led inland, where the ground grew softer, streaked with the memory of recent rain. He rode until the light began to fail, then made camp beneath an overhang of rock. The fire crackled quietly, a single comfort in the growing dark. He roasted what little food remained in his pack, dry meat and stale bread, and watched the flames dance. The smoke curled upward and vanished into the night. Somewhere far below, the sea murmured against the stones. He should have slept, but dreams waited too close to waking. He sharpened his swords instead, the steady rasp of whetstone on steel soothing in its simplicity. Each stroke drew sparks that flared and died like fleeting thoughts. When he finally sheathed the blades and lay down, he told himself that this was the end, that the curse had been undone, the dead freed, and Elandra's name at last consigned to the quiet she had long denied. But the world had other plans. He woke before dawn to the sound of water. Not rain. This was heavier, slower, as though the tide itself crept up the cliff to reach him. He sat up, hand already on his hilt. The fire had burned to embers. The air shimmered with moisture. Mist gathered at the edge of the camp, coalescing into a shape. A figure stepped from it, a woman, tall and pale, her eyes dim as dying stars. Not Elandra. This one wore armor streaked with salt and rust, the sigil of Karak still faint upon the breastplate. "Witcher," she said, "you ended her curse." Geralt rose, wary. "Who are you?" Another she bound without knowing. "I was of the Duke's guard sent to the coast when the graves first opened. The storm took us. She drew our souls without intent, and we lingered between." "You should be gone now," he said. "The binding's broken." Her expression was unreadable. "Gone where?" "The sea takes, but it does not guide. It forgets slowly," as she said. Geralt's jaw tightened. "What do you want of me?" "To tell you what follows." He folded his arms. "Then speak." The storm was not hers alone, the spirit said. She reached into the sea, and the sea answered. What she called, it kept. When you broke her spell, you tore a hole through which something older now stirs. It sleeps, but not for long. He stared at her. "You're saying I woke something?" "You freed it," she corrected. "The sea is memory, Witcher. All that dies returns to it. Now it remembers being alive." The wind shifted, the mist began to thin, and the spirit's form flickered. "When the moon turns red, go east," she said quickly, "to the Isles of Lorne. There you will find what you've set loose." "Wait." But she was gone, leaving only the hiss of wind through the rocks. Geralt stood motionless for a moment, then cursed softly under his breath. He kicked out the last embers of the fire, saddled Roach, and rode towards the east. The days that followed were grim and gray. The road wound down from the cliffs into a maze of gullies and marshes. Water pooled where none had been before. The rivers ran higher, their currents restless. At night, strange lights flickered above the waves, cold blue sparks that hovered before vanishing. The fishermen he passed along the coast spoke in whispers of new tides and ships that vanished without trace. He reached the harbor town of Kestrel by the 7th evening. It was larger than Saltview, though half its docks lay broken by storms. He stabled Roach at the inn and went to find a shipmaster. The tavern smelled of tar and old beer, filled with the weary murmur of sailors. When they saw the medallion at his throat, conversation faltered. A thick-set man approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Witcher," he said, "we've no contracts for monsters. The sea's already taken them all." "I'm not here for coin," Geralt replied. "I need passage east, the Isles of Lorne." The man's expression darkened. "No one sails there, not since the red tide." "Someone must." The man hesitated, then glanced toward the harbor. "There's a fisherman named Dorek. Old Fool's lost his sons to those waters and still goes back. If anyone will take you, it's him." Geralt nodded and left a coin on the counter. "For your trouble." He found Dorek's hut at the far edge of the docks, where the sea lapped softly against rotting planks. The old man sat mending a net by lantern light, his hands steady despite their tremor. "You're bound for the Isles?" Dorek asked when Geralt told him his need. "Then you're bound for death, Witcher. The sea there's wrong, moves when it shouldn't, glows at night." "I've seen worse," Geralt said. The old man studied him for a long time, then sighed. "Be at the pier at dawn. I'll take you as far as the fog allows." When morning came, the sky burned crimson. True to his word, Dorek waited with a small boat, its hull patched and weather-worn. The Witcher climbed aboard without ceremony. The sails filled with wind, and the land fell away behind them. The sea stretched endless and gray. For hours neither man spoke. The waves rose higher as they went, their color darkening from steel to black. At last, Dorek broke the silence. "See there?" He pointed toward the horizon where faint shapes broke the mist, low islands jagged as broken glass. "Lorn, the sea forgets nothing there." Geralt watched the line of land draw closer, his eyes narrowing. The wind carried a whisper, faint but clear, threading through the rush of the waves. "Geralt of Rivia." He looked toward the sound. The sea had begun to glow beneath the boat, lines of blue light swirling like veins beneath the surface. He tightened his grip on the rail. "I know," he murmured. "I'm coming." And as the boat crossed the threshold of the glowing water, the world around them shifted, and the sea began once again to remember its dead. The Isles of Lorn rose from the sea like the bones of a drowned god. Black cliffs sheered upward from the waves, their faces slick with salt and shadow. The air smelled of storms long past, and the cries of seabirds echoed endlessly through the mist. Even at midday the light was dim, filtered through a shroud of low clouds that turned the world to silver and gray. Geralt stood at the prow of the small boat as it cut through the dark water. The wind tangled his hair and stung his eyes, but he did not look away. Dorek, the old fisherman, steered in silence, his weathered hands steady on the tiller. The sea around them shimmered faintly, its depths pulsing with a dull blue glow that seemed to follow their passage. As they neared the shore, the wind died. The water grew unnaturally calm, its surface glassy. Dorek spat over the side and muttered a prayer under his breath. "No tide here," he said, "no current. It's as if the sea's holding its breath." Geralt's medallion began to tremble. "Stay with the boat," he told the old man. "If anything stirs, sail back to the mainland." Dorek gave a thin, humorless smile. "Aye, Witcher, but if the sea takes you, I doubt even you'll swim back." Geralt stepped onto the rocks. The stones were slick beneath his boots, cold enough to burn. Above him, a narrow path wound up the cliff toward the heart of the island. He followed it, each step careful and deliberate. The mist thickened as he climbed, wrapping the world in ghostlight. At the summit, the path opened onto a plateau. There stood the ruins of an ancient temple, columns broken and half buried, an altar cracked down the middle. The carvings along the stones were old, older than the northern kingdoms, older even than the conjunction, symbols of waves and eyes, of hands reaching upward from water. He approached the altar. Its surface was smooth and black, as though carved from the sea itself. In its center lay a depression shaped like a tear. Geralt reached into his pouch and drew out the last of the silver tokens he had gathered along his journey, the tears that had followed him from Saltview to the mountains, from the mountains to this place. Each one glimmered faintly in the mist. He set them in the hollow one by one. The moment the last touched the stone, the air changed. The wind fell away. The world held its breath. Then the sea began to rise. It came not in waves, but as a single steady ascent. The water climbed the cliffs like a living thing, spilling over the edge of the plateau and circling the altar. It did not touch Geralt, though he could feel its power pressing against him, immense and old as time itself. The silver tears sank into the altar, vanishing beneath the surface, and light spread outward in ripples of blue and white. A voice rose from the depths, not Alandra's, but many voices, layered upon one another, speaking as one. We remember you, Witcher. We remember the grave, the fire, the breaking of the tide. Geralt stood unmoving. I came to end it. The water surged higher, swirling around him. In it, shapes began to form, faces, countless faces, the drowned of centuries. They gazed up at him with eyes that held neither hatred nor mercy. It is ended, the voices said. But what was ended must begin anew. You have freed us from her binding, but you carry what she left behind, the mark of remembrance. The sea does not forget its own. Geralt's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. Then take it back. A pause, a stillness so deep it seemed the world stopped turning. Then the sea spoke again. To take it is to take you. You are bound to the memory you freed. The sea called your name because it knew you, because you are its mirror. The water reached his knees now, glowing brighter, its light climbing his armor. The medallion on his chest pulsed in answer. Geralt felt something tugging within him. Not pain, not fear, but the strange weight of recognition. So that's the truth, he murmured. All this time the curse wasn't hers alone. The light deepened to gold. The drowned shapes sank back into the depths, their faces serene. The water's voice softened. Not a curse, a choice. She sought to return what the world took from her. You sought to give it rest. Two halves of the same act. The sea remembers both. Geralt took a slow breath. And what does the sea want now? To sleep, it said simply. To dream without chains. The glow flared once more, blinding him. He felt the water rise above his chest, his shoulders, his face. It closed over him like a veil. Yet there was no struggle, no cold. Only silence, deep and vast. In that silence he heard Alandra's voice one last time. You did not drown, Geralt of Rivia. You descended to the place where all memories rest. Leave what you have taken. Return lighter than you came. He opened his hand, and the medallion slipped from his grasp. It sank into the light and was gone. When he drew breath again, he was lying on the shore. The tide lapped gently at his boots. The sky above was clear for the first time in days, washed clean by dawn. Roach stood nearby, reins loose, waiting as if no time had passed. He pushed himself to his feet. The world felt quieter. His chest was lighter, though the medallion was gone. He touched the scar at his neck, the place where its chain had rested, and for the first time in years, he felt nothing stirring beneath the surface. No whispers, no tremors. He turned toward the sea. The Isles of Lorne were already fading into mist, as though the ocean were reclaiming them. Only the faint gleam of sunlight on the waves remained, like a promise kept. Geralt mounted Roach and rode west, back toward the land of the living. The wind carried the scent of salt, but it was gentler now, no longer burdened with voices. As he reached the cliffs overlooking the mainland, he paused and looked once more at the horizon. The sea stretched endless, calm, and unbroken. It had forgotten the storm, the graves, the names. He smiled faintly. "Sleep well," he said. The gulls wheeled above him, their cries sharp and clean in the morning air. Witcher turned his horse toward the rising sun, and the world behind him dissolved into light. The grave no longer whispered his name, but somewhere far beneath the waves, the sea dreamt of a white-haired swordsman who had taught it how to let go.